everyone, my name is Zoe.
I'm Whitney.
And I'm Rebecca.
And today we'll be presenting our research project that is based on an article that was assigned to us from our dental hygiene course. And the article itself is titled Contemporary Consortium of Periodontal Diseases and Atherosclerotic Cardiovascular Disease. And pretty much it explores the connection between periodontal disease and heart health. Specifically, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, or a shortened way of saying it is ACVD. We didn't necessarily choose the article ourselves, but once we actually got into it, we were pretty surprised by how deep the connection runs between gum disease and systemic inflammation, especially how that inflammation can impact our heart health. And it's really just a great example of why oral health is way more than just about teeth. And pretty much throughout the article, we broke it down throughout different characteristics. So we'll be going over PICO, the search criteria that was used in the article, their research design, their level of evidence, the learning objectives, and just an overall conclusion.
So to give a little background, the article is a narrative review that summarizes current research on how periodontal disease might contribute to cardiovascular problems. Both conditions are chronic and inflammatory, and they actually share several risk factors like smoking, diabetes, and obesity. What the article does is break down the science behind that connection. It explains how the bacteria involved in periodontal disease can enter the bloodstream, trigger that immune response, and potentially contribute to the development of arterial plaque as well as inflammation.
It also touches on how certain biomarkers like C-reactive protein, interleukins, and even heat shock proteins are elevated in both periodontitis and cardiovascular disease. So the link isn't just observational, it's supported by specific biochemical pathways.
Next, we used the PICO model to organize the research question, and the article addresses PICO, which stands for P as in population, I as in intervention, the C stands for comparison, and the O for outcome.
So for this article, P is for people with periodontal disease. The I is treatment of periodontal disease, like non-surgical periodontal therapy. And the C is those without periodontal disease or those that are left untreated. And then the O is the risk of developing or worsening atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease.
Basically, the question is, does treating periodontal disease help reduce the risk or severity of ACVD? And based on what the article reviewed, the answer leans toward yes, although more research is still needed to be completely sure.
The article didn't give us a step-by-step search strategy like you'd see in a systematic review, but it did reference over 60 different sources. These included randomized clinical trials, observational studies, and other review articles pulled from databases such as PubMed, Scopus, as well as Google Scholar.
They focused on studies that looked at inflammation, immune response, oral microbiota, and biomarkers like CRP and interleukins in both periodontal and heart disease contexts. So their search was broad but focused on relevant data.
They actually also excluded some case reports and just some overall small studies that seem to also lean toward including only peer-reviewed human and animal model data, and that actually also adds some credibility even though the review itself isn't systematic.
Still, the article does a good job at summarizing the biological mechanisms and citing specific studies. For example, it talks about Porphyromonas gingivalis and other oral pathogens that have been found in atherosclerotic plaque.
Yes, and that is actually huge because it suggests that oral bacteria can travel through the bloodstream and actually get embedded into the heart tissue, and that can contribute to more inflammation and even plaque rupture. And then for the research design, when comparing the qualitative, quantitative, and the mixed methods, non-numerical data such as themes, experiences, and perceptions, which offers depth and context to complex issues. Quantitative designs really rely on numerical data and statistical analysis, which can test hypotheses and measure outcomes objectively. And lastly, the mixed methods designs combine both the qualitative and the quantitative approaches, which provide a lot more of a more comprehensive understanding by leveraging both the numerical trends and the contextual insights.
So as we mentioned earlier, this is a narrative review, which is more of a qualitative summary than a data-heavy analysis. It's useful for bringing together lots of scattered information, especially when exploring complex relationships like this one. But it's not without limitations. Narrative reviews can be subjective since the authors choose which studies to include. So while this article is great for building awareness and offering hypotheses, it's not the highest level of evidence.
Still, the article does a good job summarizing the biological mechanisms and citing specific studies. For example, it talks about Porphyromonas gingivalis and other pathogens that have been found in atherosclerotic plaque.
And then that actually also suggests that oral bacteria can travel again throughout the bloodstream and get embedded into the heart tissue.
In terms of evidence levels, this article would fall into level 3 because it's a narrative review that relies on observational and experimental studies rather than conducting its own. It's not as strong as a randomized controlled trial or systematic review, but it's still valuable for exploring complex interdisciplinary topics, and it did a good job at presenting both direct and indirect mechanisms like linking periodontitis to heart disease.
It also included information from clinical trials and meta-analysis on the effects of periodontal therapy on cardiovascular markers like CRP, fibrinogen, and IL-6.
And then even though the review itself isn't the original research, the sources that it pulls from are definitely mostly solid, which also strengthens the overall takeaway from the article. One major learning point for us was the understanding how chronic inflammation from periodontal disease can affect more than just our mouth. It can actually also contribute to systemic issues like endothelial dysfunction and plaque buildup in the arteries. Another thing that we learned is that even though periodontitis and ACVD are complex and multifactorial, they do actually have a lot in common, especially when it comes to inflammatory pathways and the immune response.
So this article also made us realize that our role as dental hygienists goes beyond the mouth. Educating patients about these connections can really make a difference in their long-term health.
And finally, even though evidence isn't 100% conclusive, it's strong enough that we should at least be able to do screening for cardiovascular risk factors in patients with chronic periodontal disease and collaborating more with medical professionals.
So in summary, this article presents a compelling case that periodontal disease and cardiovascular diseases are connected, mostly through inflammation and bacterial spread.
It outlines both direct mechanisms like bacteria entering the bloodstream and indirect ones like immune system activation and systemic inflammation markers that affect blood vessels.
And again, even though the article itself doesn't say for sure that treating periodontal disease will prevent heart attacks, it does still suggest that periodontal therapy might help reduce the systemic inflammation, and which is obviously definitely good for just our overall health. Thank you guys. And then this is just the references that we used.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.